The chandelier crystals caught the candlelight and scattered it across the ballroom like frozen stars, each glimmer a reminder of the glittering facade Lady Celestine Harwood had maintained for far too long. She stood near the marble pillar at the edge of the dance floor, her emerald silk gown flowing around her like water, her gloved hands clasped loosely before her as she watched the swirling couples with eyes that held no warmth. The annual Christmas ball at Ashworth Manor was London's most anticipated event of the season, a spectacle of wealth and aristocratic splendor, where fortunes changed hands through whispered promises and strategic marriages were sealed with knowing glances. For Celestine, it would be her final performance. She had rehearsed her exit countless times in the solitude of her bedchamber. When the clock struck midnight, she would slip through the servants' entrance where her modest travelling case already waited. By dawn, she would be on the road to her late aunt's cottage in Cornwall, a place so remote that even the most persistent gossips would lose interest in pursuing her. The Harwood name had endured enough scandal, enough whispered speculation about debts and dishonour. Her younger sister Margaret deserved a chance at happiness without being tainted by association, and their mother needed peace in her declining years. Celestine's disappearance would be the greatest gift she could offer them, a final act of love disguised as abandonment. The orchestra shifted into a waltz, and the dancers adjusted their positions accordingly. Celestine recognized most of the faces around her: Lady Pemberton with her perpetual sneer, Lord Ashford, who had once courted her before discovering the true state of her family's finances, Miss Clarissa Thornton, who delighted in spreading rumours about anyone who threatened her position as the season's reigning beauty. These people had been her world for 23 years, yet she felt no attachment to them, no regret at leaving them behind. They were like the chandelier crystals, pretty from a distance, cold and sharp upon closer inspection. A footman passed with a silver tray bearing champagne flutes, and Celestine accepted one more from habit than desire. The bubbles rose steadily through the pale liquid, each one reaching for freedom before bursting at the surface. She understood that impulse intimately. For 3 seasons, she had smiled through every cruel remark, maintained perfect posture through every slight, and protected her family's remaining dignity with a grace that exhausted her down to her very bones. The champagne tasted like resignation. "You appear as though you're attending a funeral rather than a celebration." The voice came from behind her, low and measured, with an aristocratic quality that suggested its owner had never needed to raise it to command attention. Celestine turned slowly, prepared to deliver one of her practiced, pleasant responses, but the words died before reaching her lips. Lord Evander Croswell, the Duke of Dunraven, stood before her with an expression that managed to convey both interest and careful restraint. She had seen him at various social events throughout the season, always from a distance, always surrounded by ambitious mothers and their eager daughters. He was reportedly 30 years old, though his eyes suggested someone who had witnessed far more than his years should have accumulated. Dark hair swept back from a face that artists would call classically handsome, strong jaw, straight nose, lips that hinted at either cruelty or passion depending on the observer's imagination. But it was his eyes that held her attention, grey like storm clouds over the ocean, intelligent and searching. "Perhaps funerals are more honest than celebrations, Your Grace," Celestine replied, surprising herself with the truth. She had intended to offer some meaningless pleasantry, but standing before this man whose reputation for cold detachment rivaled her own, she found she lacked the energy for pretense. The Duke's eyebrow lifted fractionally, the only indication that her response had affected him. "An intriguing perspective, though I confess I find both equally tedious in their predictability. At a funeral, everyone mourns publicly, while calculating their inheritance privately. At a celebration like this, everyone dances and smiles while plotting their next social maneuver. Then why attend at all?" The question escaped before Celestine could consider its impertinence. One did not challenge a duke, especially not the Duke of Dunraven, whose influence in Parliament and extensive estates made him one of the most powerful men in England. Yet his observation had struck something honest in her, and she found herself unwilling to retreat into conventional deference. "Obligation," he answered simply. "The same reason that brings most people to these affairs, I suspect. Though you, Lady Celestine, seem to carry yours with particular grace under pressure." He paused, then added with deliberate precision, I've observed you throughout the season. You maintain perfect comportment, even when others would falter. It's quite remarkable, actually. The statement should have flattered her, but instead it sent a chill down her spine. She had believed herself invisible in her careful neutrality, just another face in the crowd of ambitious young women seeking advantageous matches. The idea that someone, especially someone as formidable as the Duke of Dunraven, had been watching her movements felt both thrilling and dangerous. I wasn't aware I merited such attention, Your Grace. Most people don't notice what they're not looking for, he said, extending his hand in a gesture that appeared casual, but felt weighted with significance. Would you do me the honor of this dance? Celestine stared at his outstretched hand as though it were a serpent preparing to strike. The Duke of Dunraven never danced at social events. It was one of the many facts whispered about him during afternoon teas and garden parties. He attended the balls, fulfilled his social obligations through conversation and strategic positioning, but never took to the dance floor. His sudden invitation felt like a trap, though she couldn't identify what he hoped to catch. I would not wish to force you into an activity you clearly disdain, Your Grace, she said carefully, aware that several nearby guests had noticed their interaction and were now watching with poorly concealed curiosity. You wouldn't be forcing anything. I'm making a choice, Lady Celestine, just as you made a choice to stand here contemplating your escape, rather than participating in the festivities. His grey eyes held hers with an intensity that suggested he saw far more than she wished to reveal. One dance before you disappear. Surely you can spare that much time. Her breath caught. How could he possibly know about her plans? She had told no one, had been meticulously careful in her preparations. Yet his words indicated awareness of her intentions, and the casual way he spoke them suggested he found nothing particularly shocking about the idea of her fleeing society entirely. Against every instinct of self-preservation, Celestine placed her gloved hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with surprising gentleness, and he led her onto the dance floor with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding any space he occupied. The other dancers made room automatically, their movements creating a small clearing around them. The orchestra seemed to swell, the violins rising in a crescendo that matched the sudden acceleration of Celestine's heartbeat. Evander's hand settled at her waist with appropriate propriety, yet she felt the warmth of it even through the layers of silk and corseting. They began to move, and she was startled to discover that he danced with the same measured precision he brought to everything else, controlled, elegant, devastatingly effective. They glided across the marble floor in perfect synchronization, and Celestine found herself pulled into the rhythm despite her earlier exhaustion. "You're trembling," he observed quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear over the music. "Are you frightened of me, Lady Celestine?" "Should I be, Your Grace?" She met his gaze directly, refusing to look away, even as her pulse hammered against her throat. "You have a reputation for destroying those who displease you. I'm told you once bankrupted a Viscount simply for spreading false rumors about your late father." "The rumors weren't false," Evander corrected, spinning her smoothly into a turn. "They were true, which made them worse. My father was a gambling addict who nearly destroyed our family's fortune before drinking himself to death. The Viscount's crime wasn't dishonesty, it was disloyalty. He had been my father's supposed friend and chose to betray that friendship for social currency." His expression remained neutral, but his eyes had gone cold. "I believe in consequences, Lady Celestine. Actions should have weight." "And yet you're dancing with me," she said softly. "The daughter of a man accused of embezzling from his own business partners. A woman whose family name is synonymous with financial ruin and moral corruption. What consequences does this action carry for you, Your Grace?" The question hung between them as they continued to dance, neither breaking stride nor rhythm. Around them, the other couples swirled in their own private worlds, but Celestine felt as though she and the Duke existed in a separate reality entirely, one where honest words replaced social niceties, and truth held more value than reputation. "Your father was innocent," Evander said finally, his tone matter-of-fact rather than consoling. "I took the liberty of reviewing the accounts from his business dealings. The embezzlement was committed by his partner, Lord Ashford's father, who successfully shifted blame onto your father after his death. Unfortunately, dead men cannot defend themselves, and the living rarely care about justice when scandal is more entertaining." Celestine's steps faltered, and she would have stumbled if not for Evander's firm grip steadying her. "How? Why would you—" Words failed her. The music continued, mechanical and indifferent to the revelation that had just shattered her carefully constructed composure. "Because I dislike false narratives," he answered simply, "and because watching you carry unearned shame for 3 years while maintaining perfect dignity irritated me more than I care to admit. You shouldn't have to bear your father's stolen honor alone, Lady Celestine. It's an injustice I find intolerable." They completed another rotation across the floor, but Celestine barely registered the movement. Her mind raced through the implications of what he'd just revealed. If her father was truly innocent, if the evidence existed to prove it, then her family could be restored. Margaret could make a proper match. Their mother could lift her head in society again. Everything Celestine had been running from could be confronted and overcome. But the Duke had said nothing publicly. He had investigated, uncovered the truth, and then remained silent while she suffered. The contradiction confused her. Why tell me now? Why not expose Lord Ashford's father and clear my family's name? "Because I wanted to understand you first," Evander said, and something in his voice had shifted, become more intimate despite the public setting. "I wanted to know if you would run or fight when given the truth. I wanted to see if you possessed the courage I suspected you did." The waltz was drawing to its conclusion, the final notes approaching. "And I wanted this moment, this single dance, before offering you a choice that will change everything." The music ended with a flourishing chord, and the dancers applauded politely. Evander stepped back, releasing Celestine's waist but not her hand. Instead, he lifted it slowly, deliberately, drawing her gloved fingers toward his lips with such careful intention that several nearby guests gasped audibly. In the silent pause between one dance and the next, before the orchestra could strike up another tune, the Duke of Dunraven, the man known throughout London for his emotional detachment and refusal of romantic entanglements, pressed his lips to Lady Celestine Harwood's hand. The kiss lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but in that brief span, Celestine felt her carefully frozen heart crack open. His mouth was warm even through her glove, the pressure gentle, yet unmistakably deliberate. When he lifted his head, his grey eyes held hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. Around them, the ballroom had gone perfectly silent. Every guest, every servant, every musician watched the unprecedented display with varying expressions of shock, delight, and calculation. "Lady Celestine," Evander said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed space, "would you honor me with your company on the terrace? I have a proposition that requires privacy." The request was scandalous, even by the relaxed standards of a Christmas ball. Young unmarried ladies did not venture onto dimly lit terraces with notorious bachelors, especially not when that bachelor was the Duke of Dunraven. Yet Celestine found herself nodding, found her voice responding with steady certainty, despite the chaos in her chest. "I would be honored, Your Grace." He offered his arm and she accepted it, aware that with this simple gesture she was abandoning her plans for escape and stepping instead into unknown territory far more dangerous than anything she had fled. They walked through the parting crowd toward the glass doors leading to the terrace, leaving behind a ballroom full of whispered speculation and envious glares. Miss Clarissa Thornton looked positively murderous, her face flushed with indignation. Lady Pemberton's fan moved rapidly, barely concealing her shocked expression. Lord Ashford stared at them with narrowed eyes, his champagne flute frozen halfway to his lips. The December air hit Celestine's bare shoulders like a physical blow when they stepped outside, but the cold felt clarifying after the stifling heat of the ballroom. The terrace was illuminated by paper lanterns hanging from the stone balustrade, their warm glow creating pools of amber light against the darkness. Beyond the manor's grounds, London spread out like a carpet of scattered diamonds, gas lamps marking streets and squares with geometric precision. Evander removed his coat with fluid efficiency and draped it around Celestine's shoulders before she could protest. The garment still held his body heat and smelled of sandalwood and something uniquely masculine that made her senses sharpen with awareness. They stood at the balustrade looking out over the city, not touching but close enough that she felt the energy radiating from him like heat from a banked fire. "I apologize for the theatrical display," he said finally, his breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. But subtlety rarely accomplishes what bold action does, and I needed everyone in that ballroom to understand that you are now under my protection. The gossip will spread through London by morning. No one will dare whisper about the Harwood family's dishonor when they're too busy speculating about your connection to me. You've made me the subject of different gossip, Celestine pointed out, though she couldn't summon any real anger about it. She had already decided to leave society behind. Being talked about seemed preferable to being forgotten, especially if it meant her family might somehow benefit from the association. Better to be envied than pitied, Evander countered. The women in that ballroom now see you as competition rather than a cautionary tale. The men see you as valuable rather than tainted. Perception is reality in our world, Lady Celestine, and I've just altered the perception surrounding you entirely. She turned to face him directly, studying his profile in the lantern light. His jaw was set with determination, his expression revealing nothing of his internal thoughts. Why? The question emerged as barely more than a whisper. Why would you involve yourself in my family's problems? You owe us nothing, we barely know each other. I told you I dislike injustice. He met her gaze with unwavering steadiness. But I'll admit there's more to it than abstract principle. I've spent the past 3 years observing you, Lady Celestine, watching you maintain grace under impossible pressure, seeing you protect your family's dignity while sacrificing your own happiness. You possess a quality that's remarkably rare in our circles, genuine strength disguised as delicate femininity. I find it... He paused, seeming to search for the right word. Compelling. I'm not delicate, Celestine said, surprised by the defensive edge in her voice. I'm exhausted. There's a difference. Yes, he agreed, and that exhaustion is precisely why you plan to flee tonight. You've carried too much for too long with insufficient support. It's unsustainable. He shifted position, turning fully toward her now, his expression becoming more intent. Which brings me to my proposition. Marry me, Lady Celestine. The words landed like physical blows, stealing her breath and equilibrium simultaneously. Of all the things she had expected him to say, a marriage proposal ranked somewhere below a declaration of war and above an admission of madness. She stared at him, searching for any indication that he was jesting, but his face remained perfectly serious. You're not proposing, she said slowly, testing the words. You're negotiating. This is a business transaction. All marriages in our class are business transactions, Evander replied calmly. The difference is that I'm being honest about the terms, rather than disguising them with false sentiment. You need social rehabilitation and financial security for your family. I need... He hesitated, and for the first time since she'd met him, something vulnerable flickered across his features before being ruthlessly suppressed. I need someone intelligent enough to understand the complexities of my position and strong enough to withstand the pressures that come with it. Most importantly, I need someone who won't mistake a strategic alliance for a romantic fairy tale. The last statement stung more than Celestine wanted to admit. She had already decided that romantic love was a luxury she couldn't afford. Yet hearing him state so bluntly that their union would be devoid of such feelings felt like a door slamming shut on possibilities she hadn't realized she still harbored. And what do I gain beyond financial security and social acceptance? You've already proven you can provide those things through your influence alone. Legal protection, Evander answered immediately. As my Duchess, you'll have access to resources and power that can shield your family from future attacks. More than that, you'll have purpose. I have various charitable endeavors that require management, schools, hospitals, housing projects for the poor. You would have authority over these initiatives, real work that matters beyond social climbing and husband hunting. He moved closer, and Celestine caught that sandalwood scent again, mixed with the crisp winter air. I'm offering you partnership, Lady Celestine, respect, a meaningful existence rather than mere survival. It was, she realized, perhaps the most honest proposal any woman of her class had ever received. No false declarations of love, no poetic comparisons to flowers or celestial bodies, just clear terms laid out with contractual precision. She should have been offended by his clinical approach, yet instead she found herself considering it seriously. Marriage to the Duke of Dunraven would solve every practical problem facing her family. She would have the power to help Margaret find a good match, to ensure their mother's comfort, to rebuild the Harwood reputation from a position of unassailable strength. But marriage was a permanent condition. She would be bound to this man for the rest of her life, sharing his name, his bed, bearing his children if he desired them. The intimacy required felt terrifying when she barely knew him. "You don't love me," she said quietly, "and I don't love you. Isn't that a terrible foundation for a marriage regardless of how strategic the alliance might be?" "My parents loved each other passionately," Evander said, and his voice had gone flat, emotionless. "My father loved my mother so intensely that when she died in childbirth, he destroyed himself through grief. He gambled away our fortune trying to fill the void she left, drank himself into oblivion every night, and eventually killed himself through sheer neglect and despair. That kind of love is destructive, Lady Celestine. It consumes rather than sustains. I'd prefer mutual respect and compatible goals to that sort of volatile attachment." The confession explained so much about him: his controlled demeanor, his insistence on strategic thinking, his reputation for emotional detachment. He wasn't cold by nature, but by careful design, protecting himself against the kind of devastating loss that had destroyed his father. Celestine understood that impulse intimately. Her own emotional walls had been constructed for similar reasons, though her enemy had been social cruelty rather than grief. "And if one of us should develop feelings beyond mere respect?" she asked, needing to understand the boundaries he was establishing. "What happens if this strategic partnership becomes complicated by inconvenient emotions?" Evander's expression shifted into something darker, more complex. "Then we would manage it like adults, rather than melodramatic poets. Feelings need not dictate behavior, Lady Celestine. We're both intelligent enough to maintain appropriate boundaries, regardless of personal sentiment." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and lifted her chin with gentle fingers, until she met his eyes directly. "But I won't lie to you. I find you attractive, compelling, as I said. If you agree to marry me, our union will not be in name only. I will expect a wife in every sense of the word, including the physical aspects of marriage." Heat flooded Celestine's face despite the cold air. She had been raised to view marital intimacy as a duty rather than a pleasure, something to be endured for the purpose of producing heirs. Yet the way Evander looked at her now suggested he had rather different expectations. His thumb traced along her jawline, and she felt that simple touch all the way down to her toes. Her body responded with alarming enthusiasm to his proximity, her pulse accelerating and her breath becoming shallow. "I would need time," she managed, though her voice came out embarrassingly breathy. "To consider your offer properly. This is hardly a decision to make lightly." "Of course." He dropped his hand and stepped back, creating a respectable distance between them once again. "Though I should mention that time is not an unlimited resource in this situation, there's a complication I haven't yet explained." He glanced back toward the ballroom, where the party continued in their absence. "Someone has acquired a letter written by your father shortly before his death, a letter that allegedly contains his confession to the embezzlement charges. The letter is a forgery, naturally, but a convincing one. It's being shopped around London as we speak, with the intention of selling it to the highest bidder among your family's enemies." Ice flooded Celestine's veins. Just when she thought she understood the full scope of her family's troubles, another blow prepared to land. "Who would do such a thing? My father's been dead for 3 years. Why pursue this vendetta now?" "Lord Marcus Ashford," Evander said grimly, "the son of the man who actually committed the crimes attributed to your father. He's deeply in debt from his own poor financial management and sees your family's continued suffering as both entertainment and profit. If that letter becomes public, even my intervention won't be enough to overcome the scandal. Your mother would be ruined completely, and your sister's marriage prospects would be destroyed before she even enters society." The carefully orchestrated cruelty of it took Celestine's breath away. Lord Ashford had always been particularly vicious in his treatment of her, but she had attributed it to general aristocratic disdain for fallen families. Now she understood it was something far more calculated, guilt manifesting as aggression, fear that his own family's crimes might be exposed, driving him to completely annihilate any potential threat. "So, your proposal isn't just strategic," Celestine said, her mind racing through implications. "It's a rescue operation. You're attempting to save my family from imminent disaster." "I prefer to think of it as mutual benefit," Evander corrected. Yes, your need is urgent. But my need for a suitable duchess is equally pressing. The House of Lords is voting next month on legislation that would dramatically impact my business interests. Several influential peers have made it clear they would support my position if I were to settle down and marry properly, thus demonstrating stability and commitment to preserving our way of life. A bachelor duke pursuing controversial reforms appears threatening. A married duke with aristocratic connections appears reasonable. So I would be a political prop, Celestine said flatly. A decorative accessory to make you more palatable to conservative lords. You would be a partner in achieving important legislative goals, Evander countered. The reforms I'm pushing would improve conditions for thousands of workers in my factories and mines. Better wages, shorter hours, safer conditions. The traditionalists oppose these changes because they fear it will cut into their own profits if workers demand similar improvements elsewhere. Your presence at my side would reassure them that I'm not a dangerous radical, but rather a responsible peer acting within acceptable bounds. He moved closer again, his voice becoming more intense. You would be helping me do genuine good, Lady Celestine. This isn't just about social positioning. Real lives would be improved by our union. The argument was persuasive, because it was true. Celestine had heard whispers about the Duke of Dunraven's progressive policies, the way he managed his estates with unusual concern for those who worked his lands and staffed his properties. If marrying her would help him push through reforms that improved countless lives, could she really refuse based on pride or outdated notions of romantic love? The letter, she said, returning to the immediate threat. Can you acquire it before it becomes public? I'm working on it, Evander admitted, but Lord Ashford knows its value and is being cautious. He's meeting with potential buyers, but hasn't yet committed to any particular transaction. My agents are attempting to identify where he's keeping the document, but time is limited. Your best protection is the association with me. No one would dare publish a letter attacking my wife's family, regardless of its contents. But we're not married, Celestine pointed out. That single dance and kiss on my hand, however scandalous, doesn't constitute a binding commitment. Which is why I need your answer tonight. Evander's grey eyes held hers with unwavering intensity. Agree to marry me now, and I'll announce our engagement at midnight when the host makes his traditional Christmas toast. By morning, every newspaper in London will carry the story. Lord Ashford's letter will become worthless. No reputable publication would print allegations against the future Duchess of Dunraven, and even the scandal sheets would hesitate to challenge my influence directly. Celestine's mind spun with the speed at which her evening was unfolding. Hours ago she had been preparing for a quiet escape into permanent exile. Now she stood on a terrace contemplating marriage to one of England's most powerful men, while a forged letter threatened to destroy what remained of her family's honor. The choice before her felt impossible: marry a virtual stranger in a calculated alliance, or maintain her independence and watch her family suffer complete ruination. Yet beneath the panic and confusion, something else stirred. That frozen heart she had mentioned earlier was warming to the Duke's touch, responding to his combination of honesty and competence with attraction she hadn't expected to feel again. He wasn't offering her love, but he was offering respect, partnership, and purpose. After 3 years of being treated as social refuse, the prospect of being valued, even in a purely strategic sense, held undeniable appeal. I have conditions, she heard herself say, though the words seemed to come from someone else, someone braver than she felt. If I agree to this marriage, I need certain assurances. Interest flickered across Evander's face. Name them. First, my sister Margaret must be given a proper debut when she comes of age, with sufficient dowry to attract respectable suitors. Second, my mother must be provided with a comfortable residence and income for the remainder of her life, free from financial anxiety. Third, I want genuine authority over the charitable endeavors you mentioned, not ceremonial involvement. If I'm to manage schools and hospitals, I'll do it properly with real decision-making power. Agreed on all counts, Evander said without hesitation. What else? Privacy, Celestine continued, warming to her negotiation now that she had committed to the path. I understand we'll have public obligations, but I want clear boundaries around our private life. I won't tolerate infidelity. If you take mistresses, Do so discreetly and never in a manner that humiliates me publicly. In return, I'll maintain my own discretion and uphold your reputation as a devoted husband." "You misunderstand my character, Lady Celestine," Evander said, and his voice had gone low, almost dangerous. "I don't share. When I commit to something, I commit fully. If you become my wife, you'll be the only woman in my bed. I expect the same exclusive devotion in return. This isn't about discretion or public appearances. This is about the terms of our partnership being clear and unambiguous." The possessiveness in his tone should have alarmed her, but instead it sent heat curling through her abdomen. She had never been anyone's priority before, never experienced the intensity of singular focus. The idea of mattering that much to someone, even in a strategic alliance, felt intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. "Then I have one final condition," Celestine said softly. "Honesty. Complete transparency between us. If this marriage is to work without the foundation of romantic love, it must be built on truth instead. No secrets, no hidden agendas. If circumstances change or problems arise, we discuss them directly rather than maneuvering around each other." "That's the easiest condition you've named," Evander replied. "I value honesty above nearly everything else. You'll always know where you stand with me, Lady Celestine, even when the truth is uncomfortable." He extended his hand once more, this time in clear business fashion. "Do we have an agreement?" Celestine stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment, this simple gesture that would bind her fate to his irrevocably. Behind them, the ballroom glowed with golden light and echoed with music and laughter. Before them, London spread out in darkness punctuated by scattered illumination. She thought about her packed bag waiting by the servants' entrance, her plans for Cornwall, the quiet life of obscurity she had been about to embrace. Then she thought about Margaret's future, her mother's peace of mind, and the strange, unexpected possibility that perhaps she didn't need to flee after all. Perhaps she could fight instead. She placed her hand in his, and his fingers closed around hers with firm confidence. "We have an agreement, Your Grace. I'll marry you." Something shifted in Evander's expression, not quite a smile, but a softening of the harsh lines around his eyes. "Evander," he corrected, "we're to be married, Celestine. We might as well dispense with excessive formality in private." Her name on his lips sounded different than when others spoke it, warmer and more intimate. She tested his name carefully. "Evander." The syllables felt strange in her mouth, too familiar, too personal. Yet they had just agreed to share far more than names. In a matter of weeks, they would share a bed, a life, a future. The magnitude of her decision crashed over her like a wave, but before panic could take hold, Evander squeezed her hand gently. "Second thoughts are natural," he said, reading her expression with unsettling accuracy. "But I want you to understand something, Celestine. I don't make commitments lightly, and I protect what's mine with absolute ruthlessness. You're about to become mine in every legal and social sense that matters. That means no one will harm you or your family without facing my full wrath. Lord Ashford is about to discover that threatening the future Duchess of Dunraven was the greatest mistake of his miserable existence." The fierce protectiveness in his voice stirred something primal in Celestine, a response she hadn't known she was capable of feeling. She had been protecting herself for so long that the idea of someone else shouldering that burden felt almost decadent. "What will you do to him?" "Nothing illegal," Evander assured her, though his smile had turned predatory. "But Lord Ashford's creditors have been remarkably patient with his mounting debts. Perhaps they'll suddenly decide to demand immediate payment, and his primary source of income comes from business investments that happen to involve several of my associates. How unfortunate if those associations were to dissolve due to ethical concerns about his character." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, an absent gesture that sent shivers up her arm. "By the time I'm finished, he'll be so desperate for funds that selling a forged letter will be the least of his concerns. He'll likely flee to the continent to escape his creditors, which will solve our problem quite neatly." "That's remarkably vindictive," Celestine observed, though she couldn't summon any sympathy for Lord Ashford's impending difficulties. "I prefer strategically comprehensive," Evander replied. "But yes, I can be vindictive when circumstances warrant it. It's important you understand that about me, Celestine. I'm not a gentleman despite the civilized veneer. I do what's necessary to protect my interests, and I rarely lose sleep over the consequences my enemies suffer. If that troubles you, speak now before we proceed further." She should have been disturbed by his casual acknowledgement of ruthlessness. Instead, she felt oddly reassured. After years of watching powerful people destroy her family through whispered rumors and social maneuvering, there was something deeply satisfying about having that power wielded on her behalf. Evander wasn't offering her rescue through mercy. He was offering partnership through shared strength. The distinction mattered. "It doesn't trouble me," she said honestly. "I'm tired of being powerless while others control my fate. If you're offering me the chance to fight back, I'll take it gladly." "Good." Evander glanced toward the ballroom, where the sounds of celebration continued unabated. "Then let's return before your absence is noted as something scandalous rather than romantic. We have an engagement to announce, and I suspect the reactions will be entertaining." They walked back toward the glass doors together, Celestine still wrapped in his coat, their hands clasped in a way that suggested intimacy rather than mere courtesy. As they crossed the threshold back into the warmth and light of the ballroom, conversation ceased once again. Every head turned toward them, hungry for information about what had transpired during their private discussion. Celestine felt the weight of their collective attention like physical pressure, but with Evander's solid presence beside her, she found she could bear it without flinching. Lord Ashford stood near the refreshment table, his face flushed with alcohol and something darker. Rage, perhaps, or fear. He watched them approach with narrowed eyes, clearly calculating the implications of the Duke of Dunraven's obvious interest in the disgraced Lady Celestine Harwood. Miss Clarissa Thornton stood with a cluster of young ladies who whispered behind their fans, their expressions ranging from envious to outraged. Lady Pemberton had cornered the host, Lord Waverley, and appeared to be extracting information with her characteristic aggressive interrogation style. Evander led Celestine directly to the center of the ballroom, positioning them where everyone could see and hear clearly. He raised his hand, and the orchestra fell silent immediately, the conductor understanding that something significant was about to occur. The crowd pressed closer, forming a loose circle around them, courtiers sensing royal drama and unwilling to miss a single moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Evander began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hushed space, "I apologize for interrupting the festivities, but I have an announcement that cannot wait until Lord Waverley's traditional midnight toast. Tonight, Lady Celestine Harwood has done me the extraordinary honor of accepting my proposal of marriage. We will be wed at St. George's Chapel in 6 weeks' time, and I hope you'll all join us in celebrating this happy occasion." The silence lasted approximately 3 seconds before the ballroom erupted into chaos. The women gasped and shrieked and began talking over each other at volumes that suggested they had forgotten entirely about ladylike deportment. The men clapped and called out congratulations while exchanging meaningful glances that indicated they were already calculating the political and financial implications of this alliance. Lord Waverley looked torn between delight at having such momentous newsbreak at his party and concern about proper protocols being observed. Miss Clarissa Thornton's face had gone white, then red, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly, like a fish drowning in air. But it was Lord Ashford's reaction that drew Celestine's attention. He had gone perfectly still, his champagne flute frozen halfway to his lips, his eyes locked on Evander with an expression of pure hatred. He understood immediately what this engagement meant for his plans. The forged letter was now worthless, his hoped-for profit evaporated, and more than that, he had just been publicly humiliated by watching his family's victim rise to heights he could never reach. The Duke of Dunraven's bride would outrank him socially, command more influence, and possess the resources to investigate her father's true innocence. Lord Ashford's comfortable world was crumbling, and everyone in the ballroom could see it happening in real time. Lady Pemberton pushed through the crowd to reach them, her fan fluttering with agitation. "Your Grace, Lady Celestine, I must say this is quite sudden. We had no indication that you were even acquainted beyond casual social encounters. Surely a longer courtship would be more appropriate." "Lady Pemberton," Evander replied with perfect courtesy that somehow still conveyed absolute dismissal, "I appreciate your concern for propriety. However, when one finds a woman of Lady Celestine's exceptional qualities, hesitation seems foolish. I'm not a patient man by nature, and I see no reason to delay claiming the happiness I've found." He raised Celestine's hand to his lips again, pressing another deliberate kiss to her gloved fingers while maintaining eye contact with her in a way that suggested far more intimacy than their brief acquaintance actually contained. Besides, Christmas is the season for miracles, is it not? Finding one's perfect match certainly qualifies. The romantic language sounded almost comical, coming from someone who had just proposed a strategic business alliance. But Celestine recognized the performance for what it was, a deliberate construction of narrative that society would accept and repeat. By morning, they wouldn't be remembered as a desperate woman and a calculating duke making a practical arrangement. They would be a romantic Christmas miracle, a fairy tale of unexpected love conquering social barriers. The story was a lie, but it was a useful lie that would protect them both from more uncomfortable truths. "How delightful," Lady Pemberton said, though her tone suggested she found it anything but. "I'm sure we all wish you every happiness, Your Grace, Lady Celestine." She retreated back into the crowd, already whispering to her companions with animated gestures that indicated she was spreading the news with additions and embellishments. Lord Waverley approached next, beaming with genuine pleasure at having such significant news break at his event. "Your Grace, this is splendid, splendid. We must toast immediately. Where's that champagne?" He snapped his fingers at a nearby footman who scurried to fulfill the order. Within moments, servants were circulating with full trays, distributing glasses to every guest. When everyone held champagne, Lord Waverley raised his glass high. "To His Grace, the Duke of Dunraven and Lady Celestine Harwood, may your union be blessed with health, happiness and prosperity." "To the Duke and Lady Celestine," the crowd echoed, raising their glasses in unison. Celestine lifted hers as well, meeting Evander's eyes across the rim as she drank. His expression remained controlled, but something in his gaze suggested satisfaction at how events were unfolding. Everything was proceeding according to his plan, with perfect precision and timing. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and speculation. Guests approached in waves, offering their best wishes while clearly fishing for additional information about the engagement. Celestine maintained her composure through endless repetitions of the same conversation, her responses becoming automatic through sheer repetition. Yes, they were very happy. No, they hadn't been courting long, but sometimes these things happened quickly. Yes, 6 weeks seemed sudden, but why delay when they were both certain? Yes, her mother was informed and delighted. No, the wedding would not be a small private ceremony, but rather a grand public celebration befitting a duke's marriage. Most of the lies came easily because they were expected, but lying about her mother's knowledge stung. Her mother had no idea her daughter was now engaged, would learn about it tomorrow morning through gossip or newspapers like everyone else in London. Celestine made a mental note to call on her first thing in the morning, to explain before the news arrived second-hand. That conversation would be difficult. Her mother had long since given up hope of her making any match at all, let alone one as elevated as the Duke of Dunraven. As midnight approached, Celestine realized her escape bag was still packed and waiting by the servants' entrance. All her careful preparations for flight had become instantly irrelevant. She wasn't fleeing into obscurity. She was marching into the spotlight as the future Duchess of Dunraven. The contrast between her expected evening and her actual circumstances felt surreal, like she had stepped through a looking glass into an alternate reality. "You're exhausted," Evander murmured during a brief lull in the endless stream of well-wishers. "Would you like me to call your carriage? I can handle the remaining social obligations alone." The consideration surprised her. She had expected him to require her continued performance for the full evening, cementing their public image as a devoted couple. "Are you certain? Won't it seem strange if I leave early?" "You're overwhelmed by emotion at our engagement," he replied smoothly. "Perfectly understandable for a young lady in your situation. Besides, you have a difficult conversation with your mother tomorrow that will require energy and clarity. Better to rest now so you can handle that properly." The casual way he anticipated her concerns and accommodated them felt oddly intimate, more thoughtful than their strategic arrangement seemed to warrant. "Thank you," Celestine said quietly. "That's very considerate." "I told you I value partnership," Evander reminded her. "That means attending to your practical needs as well as my own. I'll call on you tomorrow afternoon after you've spoken with your mother. We'll need to begin wedding preparations and discuss how to handle the various social obligations that will come with this engagement. He escorted her to her carriage personally, helping her inside with careful courtesy before stepping back. "Sleep well, Celestine," he said through the open door, "and don't worry about Lord Ashford or the letter. I'll handle everything. You focus on preparing yourself for the changes ahead." As her carriage pulled away from Ashworth Manor, Celestine watched Evander's silhouette disappear into the distance, swallowed by darkness and the swirling snow that had begun to fall. She leaned her head against the cushioned seat, physically and emotionally drained by the evening's revelations and reversals. Her life had been completely transformed in the space of a few hours, her entire future rewritten by a man she barely knew but had agreed to marry. The strangest part was that she didn't regret it. Terrified, uncertain, overwhelmed, yes, but not regretful. Evander had offered her something she hadn't realized she craved: agency. The ability to act rather than simply endure. Partnership instead of isolation. It wasn't love, but perhaps love was overrated anyway. Her parents had loved each other, and that hadn't prevented her father's reputation from being destroyed or protected her mother from devastating loss. Love didn't shield you from the world's cruelty. Power did. When Celestine finally reached her family's modest townhouse, she found herself too agitated for sleep, despite her exhaustion. She changed out of her ball gown into a simple day dress and made her way to her father's old study, a room that had remained largely unchanged since his death. His books still lined the shelves, his papers still sat stacked on the desk, his chair still positioned by the window where he used to read late into the night. She sat in that chair now, running her fingers over the worn leather arms, and allowed herself a moment of honest emotion. "I'm going to marry the Duke of Dunraven, Papa," she whispered to the empty room. "He says you were innocent. He says he can prove it. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, but I'm tired of running and hiding. I'm going to fight for our name, for Margaret and Mother, for everything we lost. I hope you'd be proud of that decision. I hope it's what you would have wanted." No answer came, of course. The dead remained stubbornly silent despite her desperate wish for guidance. But sitting in her father's chair, wrapped in shadows and memories, Celestine felt a small ember of determination ignite in her chest. She had spent 3 years mourning and surviving. Perhaps it was time to start living again, even if that life looked nothing like what she had imagined. The next morning arrived too quickly, bringing weak winter sunlight that did little to warm the frost-covered streets. Celestine barely slept, her mind cycling through endless variations of the conversation she needed to have with her mother. How did one explain becoming engaged to a duke overnight? How did she justify accepting a proposal from a virtual stranger, no matter how strategic the alliance might be? Her mother, Lady Eleanor Harwood, resided in the Dowager House on the edge of their former estate, a small cottage that had once housed visiting relatives, but now served as her refuge from society's judgment. The main house had been sold to cover her father's supposed debts, leaving the family with barely enough income to maintain modest respectability. Eleanor had retreated from London society entirely after the scandal, her health deteriorating under the combined weight of grief and social ostracism. The carriage ride to the Dowager House took less than an hour, but Celestine felt every minute stretching into eternity. She rehearsed various opening statements in her head, each one sounding more absurd than the last. "Mother, I'm engaged to the Duke of Dunraven. Yes, the Duke of Dunraven. No, we've barely spoken before last night. Yes, I know that sounds insane." When she finally arrived, she found her mother in the small sitting room working on embroidery with hands that trembled slightly from the palsy that had developed over the past year. Eleanor looked up at the sound of footsteps, her once beautiful face now lined with worry and illness, her hair more white than the blonde it had been in her youth. But her eyes still held warmth when they landed on her daughter. "Celestine, darling, what a lovely surprise. I wasn't expecting you today." Eleanor set aside her embroidery and reached for the tea service, preparing to pour as though it were any normal social call. "Mother," Celestine said, crossing the room to kneel beside her chair, "I need to tell you something important, something that's going to appear in the newspapers this morning, and I wanted you to hear it from me first." Eleanor's hands stilled on the teapot, her expression shifting to concern. "What's happened? Is Margaret all right?" "Margaret's fine. Everyone's fine. Mother, I'm engaged to be married." The teapot returned to its tray with a slightly unsteady motion. Eleanor blinked several times, processing the information. "Engaged? But you haven't been courting anyone. How could you possibly be engaged?" It happened very suddenly, Celestine admitted, still kneeling so she could look directly into her mother's eyes. At the Christmas ball last night, the Duke of Dunraven proposed and I accepted. The silence that followed felt oppressive. Eleanor stared at her daughter as though she'd suddenly begun speaking in tongues. "The Duke of Dunraven," she repeated slowly. "Lord Evander Crosswell, the Duke of Dunraven." "Yes, Mother. The man they call the Ice Duke because of his cold demeanour and refusal to engage in romantic pursuits? That's rather dramatic, but yes, that Duke of Dunraven." Eleanor's hand came up to cover her mouth, her eyes filling with tears that spilled over immediately. "Oh, Celestine. Oh, my darling girl. How did this? Why would he?" Words failed her, and she simply pulled Celestine into a fierce embrace, shaking with emotion. "Mother, please don't cry," Celestine murmured, though she felt her own eyes growing damp in response. "This is good news. Everything is going to be all right now." "I thought you'd given up," Eleanor whispered against her daughter's hair. "I thought we'd lost you to despair. You've been so distant these past months, so withdrawn. I worried you were planning something desperate." The accuracy of her mother's intuition was startling. Celestine had indeed been planning something desperate, her escape to Cornwall, her abandonment of society, but she couldn't admit that now, couldn't add to her mother's burden of worry. "I'm not giving up, Mother, I'm fighting back. The Duke has resources to help us, to clear Father's name. He believes Father was innocent." Eleanor pulled back, gripping Celestine's shoulders with surprising strength. "Innocent? How could he possibly know that?" "He investigated," Celestine explained, simplifying the complex conversation she'd had with Evander on the terrace. "He found evidence that the embezzlement was committed by Lord Ashford's father, who shifted blame onto Father after his death. The Duke is working to expose the truth." Fresh tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks, though her expression had shifted from grief to something fiercer, hope mixed with righteous anger. "That monster," she breathed. "Old Lord Ashford destroyed our family to hide his own crimes, and now his son continues the persecution. How is this possible? How can such evil go unpunished?" "It won't," Celestine promised, gripping her mother's hands. "Evander, the Duke, is working to expose everything. But, Mother, there's more you need to know. Lord Ashford's son has created a forged letter supposedly written by Father, confessing to the embezzlement. He's been trying to sell it, to destroy us completely." Eleanor's face went pale. A forged confession? But surely no one would believe— "They would believe it because they want to," Celestine interrupted gently. "Scandal is more entertaining than truth, but the moment I became engaged to the Duke of Dunraven, that letter lost its value. No publication would dare attack his future wife's family." Understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes, and with it came a complex mixture of emotions, gratitude, worry, and maternal concern. "You're marrying him to protect us," she said softly. "Oh, Celestine, you shouldn't have to sacrifice yourself this way." "It's not a sacrifice, Mother. It's a choice. My choice. For once. The Duke and I have an understanding. We're partners in this. He needs a wife for political reasons. I need protection and resources for our family. It's an arrangement that benefits everyone involved." Eleanor studied her daughter's face with the penetrating insight only a mother possessed. "But do you care for him at all? Is there any affection between you, or is this purely a business transaction?" The question struck deeper than Celestine had anticipated. She thought about Evander's grey eyes watching her across the ballroom, the warmth of his hand holding hers, the fierce protectiveness in his voice when he spoke of defending what was his. She thought about the way her heart had responded to his kiss on her hand, the unexpected heat that had flooded through her at his proximity. "I don't know yet," she admitted honestly, "but I think there could be. He's not what I expected, Mother. He's honest and direct in ways that most men in society never are. I respect him, and I believe he respects me. Perhaps that's a better foundation than passionate love that burns too hot and consumes everything." Eleanor pulled her daughter close again, holding her as though she were still a child seeking comfort after a nightmare. "You've grown so strong," she murmured. "So much stronger than I ever was. Your father would be so proud of the woman you've become. I just wish you didn't have to be quite so strong quite so soon." They spent another hour together, discussing practical matters and wedding plans, But eventually Celestine had to return home to prepare for Evander's promised afternoon visit. As her carriage rattled back toward London, she felt oddly lighter despite the weight of responsibilities she'd just assumed. Her mother's tears had been healing rather than distressing. Tears of relief and hope rather than despair. Evander arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, demonstrating the punctuality she was learning was characteristic of him. He brought with him a small army of assistants, a modiste to begin designing her wedding trousseau, a jeweler with cases of family heirlooms for her selection, and his personal secretary carrying stacks of correspondence that had already begun arriving in response to their engagement announcement. "I apologize for the invasion," Evander said as the various professionals set up their materials in the Harwood drawing room. "But we have limited time to prepare, and society will be watching every detail of this wedding. Everything must be perfect." "Perfect for whom?" Celestine asked, eyeing the chaos with some trepidation. "For us or for our audience?" "Both, ideally," he replied with the ghost of a smile. "Though I confess I care more about the practical outcome than the aesthetic spectacle. You, however, deserve a wedding that honors your new position. The Duchess of Dunraven cannot appear in anything less than magnificent fashion." The modiste, Madame Laurent, was already circling Celestine with measuring tape and critical eyes. "She has excellent proportions," the woman announced in heavily accented English. "Tall enough to carry elaborate designs, slim-waisted, good shoulders for off-the-shoulder styling. Yes, I can work with this." Being discussed as though she were a dress form rather than a person should have been annoying, but Celestine found herself oddly amused by the whole production. "Do I get any input into my own wedding gown, or shall I simply stand still and accept whatever is decided for me?" "Input is essential," Madame Laurent said seriously. "A woman must feel beautiful in her wedding dress, not just look beautiful. Tell me, Lady Celestine, what makes you feel powerful?" The unexpected question caught Celestine off guard. She had spent 3 years trying to feel invisible, not powerful. I'm not certain I understand the question." "Then we discover together," Madame Laurent declared. She began pulling fabric swatches from her cases, draping them across Celestine's shoulders and holding them up to her face in the afternoon light. "This emerald silk brings out the green in your eyes. Very striking, but perhaps too bold for a wedding. The ivory satin is classic, elegant, speaks to tradition and propriety. The champagne silk is softer, more romantic." As the modiste continued her evaluation, Evander drew Celestine aside, his secretary following with an armful of documents. "I need you to look at these invitations and seating arrangements," he said quietly. "The wedding ceremony will be at St. George's Chapel as announced, with a reception at Dunraven House. We're expecting approximately 400 guests." 400? Celestine's voice came out strangled. "That's not a wedding. That's a military campaign." "It's a statement," Evander corrected. "Every peer in England will receive an invitation. Most will attend out of curiosity, if nothing else. They need to see that our union is real, substantial, and backed by the full weight of my influence. Lord Ashford, incidentally, will not receive an invitation. His absence will be noted and interpreted correctly." The casual way he wielded social power as a weapon was simultaneously impressive and slightly terrifying. Celestine scanned the initial guest list, recognizing many names, some friendly, many neutral, a few actively hostile to her family. "Lady Pemberton is invited. She's been one of our most vocal critics." "Which is precisely why she must attend," Evander explained. "When she witnesses you becoming my Duchess, surrounded by wealth and power she can only dream of accessing, she'll understand that her opinions about your family are not only wrong, but dangerous to express. People like Lady Pemberton respect strength above all else. We're going to demonstrate strength." Over the following weeks, Celestine's life transformed into a whirlwind of preparation and social maneuvering. True to Evander's prediction, their engagement had become the sensation of the season. Invitations flooded in from hostesses desperate to secure the newly engaged couple's presence at their events. The newspapers ran daily speculation about wedding details, the Duchess's future role in society, and the romantic circumstances of their courtship. The fabricated love story that Evander had constructed on the night of their engagement had taken on a life of its own. According to popular gossip, he had been secretly admiring Lady Celestine for years, waiting for the right moment to approach her. Their dance at the Christmas ball had been the culmination of months of restrained longing, a romantic confession that could no longer be contained. The narrative was absolute fiction, but it served its purpose. Celestine was now viewed as the luckiest woman in London rather than a desperate fortune hunter who had somehow trapped a duke. Margaret, her younger sister, arrived from their aunt's country house where she had been staying during Celestine's planned escape. At 15, Margaret possessed all the natural beauty and optimism that Celestine had lost to hardship. She burst into the townhouse like a ray of sunshine, throwing herself into her sister's arms with squealing enthusiasm. "A duchess!" Margaret exclaimed, spinning around the drawing room. "My sister is going to be a duchess! Oh, Celestine, it's like something from a novel. Tell me everything. Is he handsome? Is he kind? Are you desperately in love?" "He's handsome enough," Celestine said carefully, aware that servants might overhear, "and kind in his own way. As for love, we're still becoming acquainted, Margaret. These things take time." "But surely you must feel something," Margaret pressed, her romantic young heart demanding passion and drama. "When he kissed your hand at the ball, everyone says it was the most romantic gesture anyone has ever witnessed. You must have felt your heart flutter." Celestine thought about that moment, the warmth of Evander's lips through her glove, the intensity in his grey eyes, the way every nerve in her body had suddenly come alive after years of numb endurance. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "I felt something." Margaret beamed with satisfaction. "I knew it. Oh, this is wonderful. Everything is going to be wonderful now. We'll be a proper family again, and Mother won't look so sad all the time, and I'll have my debut when I'm old enough, and perhaps catch the eye of some handsome earl or viscount." "Margaret," Celestine interrupted gently, "don't build fairy tale castles just yet. Yes, circumstances have improved dramatically, but life is rarely as simple as novels suggest. There will still be challenges ahead." "But you'll face them as a duchess," Margaret pointed out with youthful logic. "With all the power and resources that position provides, surely that makes everything easier." Before Celestine could formulate a response, Evander was announced. He entered the drawing room with his characteristic measured stride, stopping short when he noticed Margaret. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a softening around his eyes that suggested genuine pleasure. "You must be Lady Margaret," he said, bowing with perfect courtesy. "I've heard a great deal about you from your sister. It's a pleasure to finally make your acquaintance." Margaret dropped into a curtsy that was only slightly wobbly, her cheeks flushing pink. "Your Grace, the honor is entirely mine. Thank you for everything you're doing for our family. We're all so very grateful." "Your gratitude is appreciated but unnecessary," Evander replied. "I'm simply correcting an injustice that should never have occurred. Your family deserves restoration, not thanks for receiving what should always have been yours." His words brought fresh tears to Margaret's eyes, and Celestine felt her own throat tighten with emotion. This man who claimed to feel nothing, who insisted their marriage was purely strategic, demonstrated more compassion in casual conversation than most people showed in deliberate acts of charity. The following weeks blurred together in an endless succession of fittings, planning sessions, and social obligations. Celestine attended the opera on Evander's arm, dined with influential politicians and their wives, hosted afternoon teas where society's most prominent ladies evaluated her worthiness to become a duchess. Through it all, Evander remained a constant presence, protective, attentive, and surprisingly thoughtful about her comfort. She began to notice small gestures that suggested his feelings might run deeper than their supposed business arrangement. He remembered that she disliked overly sweet desserts, and ensured proper options were available at every meal they shared. He observed that crowded ballrooms made her anxious, and positioned them strategically near exits where she could breathe freely. When an elderly lord made an inappropriate comment about her father's alleged crimes, Evander's response was so icily devastating that the man fled the gathering in shame. "You didn't need to destroy him quite so thoroughly," Celestine said later that evening as they rode home in his carriage. "He's just a foolish old man repeating gossip." "He insulted my future wife," Evander replied, his voice carrying an edge that suggested the matter was not open for debate. "That cannot be tolerated. By tomorrow morning, everyone in London will know that speaking ill of you or your family carries severe consequences. It's a necessary lesson." Celestine studied his profile in the dim carriage light. This complicated man, who wielded power like a surgical instrument, yet claimed to feel nothing beyond strategic calculation. "You're not as cold as you pretend to be," she said softly. "I've been watching you, Evander. You care about people, your tenants, your servants, even me. You just don't want to admit it." He turned to face her, and in the confined space of the carriage, she suddenly became aware of how close they sat. His knee brushed against her skirts, his shoulder nearly touching hers. "What I want," he said quietly, "and what I allow myself are two entirely different things. Caring leads to vulnerability, Celestine. Vulnerability leads to pain. I watched my father destroy himself through caring too much, and I vowed never to repeat his mistakes." "So you've built walls so high that even you can't see over them," Celestine observed. "That's not strength, Evander. That's fear dressed up as control." His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought she had pushed too far, ventured into territory he would not allow anyone to explore. But then, something shifted in his expression, a crack in the carefully maintained facade. "Perhaps," he admitted, "but those walls have protected me from considerable pain over the years. I'm not certain I know how to lower them, even if I wanted to." "Then perhaps we learn together," Celestine suggested, surprising herself with the offer. When had she stopped thinking of this marriage as purely strategic and started hoping for something more? When had his presence become comforting rather than intimidating? "We're both damaged, Evander, both protecting ourselves against further hurt. Maybe that's precisely why this partnership might actually work. We understand each other's scars." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, warm and gentle despite their calluses. "You terrify me," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "You make me want things I swore I'd never risk wanting again. That should make me retreat, but instead I find myself drawn closer. It's highly inconvenient." Celestine laughed despite the intensity of the moment. "How romantic! I'm highly inconvenient." "You're dangerous," he corrected, but his thumb was tracing along her jawline now, his eyes darkening with something that looked remarkably like desire. "To my peace of mind, to my carefully constructed defenses, to every rational decision I've made about how to conduct my life, and yet I cannot seem to resist you." The carriage hit a bump in the road, jolting them closer together. Evander's arm came around her waist instinctively, steadying her, and suddenly they were pressed against each other with no proper distance remaining between them. Celestine could feel his heart beating against her shoulder, could smell the sandalwood scent she had come to associate with safety and warmth. "Evander," she breathed, though she wasn't certain whether she meant it as a question or a plea. He seemed to struggle with himself for a moment, control warring with desire in his expression. Then, with deliberate slowness, he lowered his head toward hers. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his lips hovering just above hers. "Tell me this is a mistake, and I'll pull back immediately. But Celestine, if you don't stop me now, I'm going to kiss you properly, and I'm not certain I'll be able to maintain the pretense that this marriage is purely strategic afterward." Instead of answering with words, Celestine closed the remaining distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long exile. Evander responded immediately, his arms tightening around her as he deepened the kiss with practiced skill. His mouth moved over hers with a combination of tenderness and hunger that made her entire body ignite with sensation she had never experienced before. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Evander rested his forehead against hers. "That was exceptionally unwise," he said, though he made no move to release her from his embrace. "I was doing quite well at maintaining proper boundaries." "I don't want boundaries," Celestine admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I want whatever this is between us, whatever it might become. I'm tired of protecting myself from possibilities, Evander. If this marriage is going to be real in every other sense, why not let it be real emotionally as well?" "Because emotional investment comes with the risk of devastating loss," he replied, but his hand was cradling the back of her head now, his fingers tangling in her hair. "I'm not certain I could survive loving and losing someone again, Celestine. My father's grief destroyed him. How do I know mine wouldn't do the same?" "You don't," she said simply. "That's the nature of risk. But consider what you're sacrificing by refusing to take it. A half-life of controlled detachment, meaningful connection limited by artificial boundaries, the possibility of genuine happiness abandoned out of fear. Is that really preferable to vulnerability? The carriage rolled to a stop outside Celestine's townhouse, ending their conversation before Evander could formulate a response. He helped her down with careful courtesy, his expression once again controlled and unreadable. But when he brought her hand to his lips in farewell, the kiss he pressed there felt weighted, with all the things he couldn't bring himself to say aloud. The week before the wedding brought unexpected complications. Margaret burst into Celestine's bedchamber late one evening, her face flushed with distress. "He's here," she gasped. "Lord Ashford is downstairs demanding to speak with you. The servants tried to turn him away, but he's making a terrible scene." Celestine's blood ran cold. Evander had assured her that Lord Ashford was being dealt with, that the threat he posed had been neutralized. His appearance now suggested either desperation or a final attempt at causing damage before his own circumstances became untenable. "Send word to the Duke immediately," Celestine instructed, reaching for her dressing robe. "Then stay in your room with the door locked until I tell you it's safe to come out." "But you can't face him alone," Margaret protested. "He's drunk and ranting about revenge and—" "Which is precisely why you need to stay away from him," Celestine interrupted firmly. "I'll handle this, Margaret. Trust me." She descended the stairs to find Lord Ashford in their modest drawing room, his elegant clothing dishevelled and his face flushed with alcohol and rage. He spun toward her when she entered, his eyes wild and unfocused. "There she is," he slurred. "The scheming little fortune hunter, who somehow convinced the Ice Duke to marry her. Do you think you've won, Lady Celestine? Do you think marrying Dunraven protects you from the truth?" "I think you should leave before you make this situation worse for yourself," Celestine replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The Duke will be here shortly, and I doubt he'll appreciate finding you harassing his future wife." "Let him come," Ashford snarled, pulling a crumpled letter from his coat pocket. "I have something that will interest him greatly. Your father's confession, written in his own hand. Once this is published, not even Dunraven's influence can save your family's reputation." "That letter is a forgery," Celestine said calmly, though she felt anything but calm. "You and I both know my father was innocent. Your father committed those crimes and shifted blame onto a dead man who couldn't defend himself. All you're doing now is perpetuating that lie out of greed and cowardice." "Lies!" Ashford roared, lurching toward her. "Your father was a thief and a fraud, just as you're a manipulative whore who—" He didn't finish the sentence. Evander appeared in the doorway like an avenging angel, moving with shocking speed to position himself between Celestine and the drunken lord. The transformation in his demeanor was terrifying. Gone was the controlled aristocrat, replaced by something primal and dangerous. "You have precisely 5 seconds to leave this house before I make you regret every decision that led you here tonight," Evander said, his voice deadly quiet. 1. "You can't threaten me," Ashford blustered, though he had gone pale. "I'm a peer of the realm. I have rights." 2. "That letter will destroy her family," Ashford continued desperately. "Even you can't suppress it if I give it to the right publishers. Your precious Duchess will be— 3. "Fine, I'll leave. But this isn't over, Dunraven. I'll find a way to— 4. Ashford fled, stumbling in his haste to reach the door. 2 of Evander's footmen materialized from the shadows to escort him forcibly from the property. Only when the front door slammed shut did Evander finally turn to face Celestine, his expression shifting from cold fury to intense concern. "Did he touch you? Are you hurt?" His hands moved over her shoulders and arms, checking for injury with gentle thoroughness. "I'm fine," Celestine assured him, though she was shaking now that the confrontation had ended. "Just startled. I didn't expect him to come here. He's more desperate than I anticipated," Evander said grimly, pulling her into his arms. She went willingly, resting her head against his chest and listening to the rapid pounding of his heart. "My agents were closing in on his creditor's demands. He must have decided on one final attempt to cause damage before fleeing the country." "The letter," Celestine murmured against his coat. "Even if it's a forgery, publication could still cause problems." "The letter is no longer an issue," Evander replied, his hand stroking her hair soothingly. "I acquired the original 3 days ago. What he showed you tonight was likely a copy, and a poor one at that. My solicitors are prepared to sue any publication that prints it, and every editor in London knows the consequences of challenging me legally. That paper is worthless, except as evidence of Lord Ashford's attempted fraud. Celestine pulled back slightly to look up at him. You said you acquired it 3 days ago. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to have peace of mind during our wedding preparations, he admitted. You've been under tremendous stress managing all the social obligations and planning details. I saw no reason to burden you with resolved problems. Evander, Celestine said softly, framing his face with her hands. We agreed to complete honesty between us. That includes sharing victories as well as challenges. I want to be your partner in everything, not a fragile flower you need to shelter from difficulties. Something vulnerable flickered across his expression. I'm not accustomed to partnership. I've spent so many years managing everything alone that trusting someone else feels foreign. But you're right. If we're truly going to make this marriage work beyond its strategic purposes, I need to learn to share rather than simply protect. We'll learn together, Celestine repeated the promise she had made in the carriage. Neither of us knows how to do this properly, but we're both intelligent enough to figure it out as we go. Evander kissed her then, less urgently than in the carriage, but with a tenderness that spoke of genuine affection rather than merely strategic alliance or physical desire. When he pulled back, his grey eyes had softened in a way that made him look years younger, almost vulnerable. I'm falling in love with you, he confessed quietly. I've been fighting it since the night of our engagement, telling myself it was merely attraction or respect or strategic appreciation. But Celestine, watching that drunken fool threaten you tonight made me realize something I've been avoiding. The thought of losing you terrifies me more than the pain of potential loss. You've become essential to my happiness in ways I never intended to allow. Tears spilled down Celestine's cheeks before she could stop them. I love you too, she whispered. I think I started falling that night on the terrace when you offered me partnership instead of pity. You saw strength in me when everyone else only saw shame and failure. You gave me back my ability to fight. How could I not love you for that? They stood wrapped in each other's arms as the clock chimed midnight, two damaged souls who had found unexpected healing in the most unlikely of alliances. The wedding was only days away, but the marriage had already begun, not with legal ceremony, but with honest emotion shared in a modest drawing room, while snow fell softly outside. The wedding itself was everything society had anticipated and more. St. George's Chapel overflowed with aristocratic guests, the pews filled with the most influential families in England. Celestine walked down the aisle on Margaret's arm, her mother watching with tears of joy from the front row. The wedding gown Madame Laurent had created was a masterpiece of ivory silk and delicate lace, elegant without being ostentatious, perfectly suited to a woman becoming a duchess. But Celestine barely noticed the admiring gasps or the whispered commentary from the assembled guests. Her attention was fixed entirely on Evander, who stood at the altar watching her approach with an expression that suggested she was the only person in the crowded chapel. When she reached him, he took her hand with a gentle squeeze that communicated everything words could not. The ceremony proceeded with traditional solemnity, ancient vows spoken with genuine meaning. When the Archbishop pronounced them husband and wife, Evander's kiss was chaste and appropriate for the public setting, but the promise in his eyes spoke of far more passionate celebrations to come. The reception at Dunraven House was a lavish affair that would be discussed in society columns for months afterward. 500 guests danced in the grand ballroom, dined on delicacies prepared by London's finest chefs, and toasted the new Duchess of Dunraven with expensive champagne. Lady Pemberton looked positively ill with envy. Miss Clarissa Thornton had declined the invitation entirely, claiming a sudden illness that fooled no one. Lord Ashford's absence was noted and interpreted correctly. He had fled to the continent ahead of his creditors, abandoning his position and properties to escape financial ruin. The gossips who had so eagerly repeated his slanders about the Harwood family now turned their attention to his dramatic downfall, finding fresh entertainment in his misfortunes. Late in the evening, when most guests had departed and only close family remained, Evander led Celestine onto the terrace where they had first negotiated their engagement. The December air was cold, but he wrapped his coat around her shoulders, just as he had that first night, then pulled her close against his side. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Trading your planned escape for this very public life?" Not for a moment, Celestine replied honestly. Though I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if you hadn't intervened that night. Would I really have gone through with fleeing to Cornwall, or would I have lost my nerve at the last moment? You wouldn't have lost your nerve, Evander said with certainty. You're far too brave for that. But I'm grateful I gave you a reason to stay. My life would be immeasurably poorer without you in it. They stood together watching London spread out below them, the same view they had contemplated on the night their lives changed forever. But everything was different now, no longer strangers negotiating a business arrangement, but partners who had chosen love over fear. I've been thinking about your charitable projects, Celestine said. The schools and hospitals you mentioned. I'd like to begin working on those immediately. There's a particular need for educational opportunities for young women from impoverished families. I want to establish a program that teaches them practical skills so they're not entirely dependent on marriage or domestic service for survival. Evander's arm tightened around her waist. That's an excellent idea. I'll have my secretary arrange meetings with our administrators next week. Between your vision and our resources, we could make a genuine difference in many lives. That's what I want our marriage to be, Celestine said. Not just social positioning or financial security, but a partnership that creates positive change. We've both been given tremendous privilege and power. It seems wasteful not to use it for meaningful purposes. My very own revolutionary duchess, Evander teased, pressing a kiss to her temple. Society has no idea what they've gained in you, but I do. I understand exactly how fortunate I am. In the months that followed, the Duke and Duchess of Dunraven became known throughout London, not only for their unexpected love story, but for their progressive social initiatives. The schools Celestine founded provided education to hundreds of young women who had previously been denied such opportunities. The hospitals they sponsored offered medical care regardless of patients' ability to pay. Their factories and mines became models of worker safety and fair compensation, inspiring other aristocrats to consider their own responsibilities toward those who labored on their behalf. The legislation Evander had been pushing through Parliament passed with surprising ease once he was married and settled, perceived as stable and reasonable rather than dangerously radical. Lives improved across England because two damaged people chose partnership over isolation. Margaret made her debut 2 years later, under the sponsorship of her Duchess sister, attracting several worthy suitors. She eventually married a kind-hearted Viscount who loved her for more than her dowry. Lady Eleanor's health improved dramatically once the family's financial stress was eliminated, and she lived long enough to hold her first grandchild, Celestine and Evander's daughter, named Charlotte, after Celestine's late grandmother. As for Celestine and Evander themselves, they built a marriage that combined strategic partnership with genuine devotion. They argued occasionally, disagreed on tactics and approaches, but never doubted their fundamental commitment to each other. The walls Evander had built so carefully around his heart came down gradually brick by brick until he could express love and vulnerability without fear. Celestine's frozen heart thawed completely, learning that being valued and cherished was far more satisfying than mere survival. Years later, when their children asked how they met, Celestine and Evander would exchange knowing glances before telling the sanitized version society preferred. A romantic Christmas miracle, love at first sight, a duke who couldn't resist the lady in the emerald gown. The truth was more complex. Two broken people finding unexpected healing through honest partnership, strategic alliance transforming into genuine love, and the recognition that sometimes the greatest strength comes from acknowledging vulnerability rather than hiding it. They never forgot that Christmas ball where everything changed, that moment when a desperate woman planning escape met a controlled duke willing to take a calculated risk. What began as a business transaction became something neither had anticipated. A love story built on truth instead of fantasy, partnership instead of possession, and the courage to believe that hearts could heal if given the proper care. And so our tale concludes, dear listeners, with a reminder that love often arrives in unexpected forms. Sometimes it wears the face of strategic alliance rather than passionate romance. Sometimes it builds slowly through shared goals and mutual respect rather than explosive instant attraction. But regardless of how it begins, genuine love transforms those brave enough to embrace it, turning survival into thriving and isolation into connection. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through Celestine and Evander's story. If you enjoyed this tale of unexpected love and redemption, we would be deeply grateful if you would subscribe to Echoes of Romance so you never miss our next story. Please take a moment to leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Did you connect with Celestine's journey from despair to hope? Did Evander's transformation from cold duke to devoted husband resonate with you? Your feedback helps us create the stories you want to hear. And don't forget to hit that like button and activate your notifications so you'll be the first to know when we share our next romantic tale. Until then, may you find your own unexpected miracles this holiday season, and may your hearts remain open to love in whatever form it chooses to appear. This is Echoes of Romance, reminding you that every heart deserves its happy ending.